Yeah, today's talk is by Murray Hutching. It's a possum hunter from Ratahi, and Murray talks about the changing distributions of possums, the art of trapping a possum, poisoning possums, and the ecosystems that possums live in.
I've worked with some very good trappers that have spent their life as commercial hunters and trappers, and I was lucky as a young guy to be able to pick their brains and learn a lot of their knowledge. And I just carried on in the 70s. I used to possum for the winter and then hunt for the summer, and I worked in various places. I've trapped basically from one end of New Zealand to the other. I've spent, and as the years went on and there was more government poisoning, 1080 poisoning came in, the cyanide became less effective after you've had 1080, and went back to trapping with leg hole traps, which I found over the years the most successful way to catch a possum. But I don't get paid to do predator control. I get paid by the amount of skins and fur and pet food that I can sell.
Yeah.
So I have to be productive, otherwise I don't make any money.
So
that's what I try and work for every month. That's my target that I try and set. Even now I still do it. The week before I rolled my bike, I did I think 9 days, and I averaged 70 a day over that. I've tried a lot of different kinds of kill traps, but the possums become aware of them very quickly. And with a leg trap set right, you can sometimes catch up to 20 possums without moving a trap, which makes the job a lot easier. I've noticed the different breeds of possums.
yeah,
And it's quite incredible. They have been the same for the last, well, I've seen it in the last 50 years, but I know guys that will be before me. I know a lot of the old buyers don't realise, but there was a lot of different liberations of possums around New Zealand at different times from different places. And it appears, well, it's pretty obvious to me that those different breeds have not changed at all in the last 100 years since they were liberated. And Hutching has bought possum skins for ever. He was the main grader for Dalgiddies, which run the big auctions in New Zealand for years. And he would open those bales and start grading, and he'd say, these are Whanganui River skins, which are a small grey skin. Then he would open a bale and he'd say, oh, these are Kaimanawa skins. Then he would open a bale and say, oh, these are from what I call a 42nd verse, but in behind Ofonga. And they were a different skin again. And he would open these and he'd say, these skins are off Mount Pihanga, and he never got it wrong. But this is what is called a slate or a rock possum, which is a black possum with a golden belly. It's they're a pretty skin. Now, most places you will get one of these in maybe 2,000. Trapping in Fiordland, I found a pocket of these things where I was catching 9 or 10 a day, and just in about a 5k area, and it really interested me. And so I went back 10 years later and trap this area again. In the same area of 4 or 5k, I was catching 6 or 7 or of these rock possums a day. Once you get away from there, you're catching none. Possum like us. This is a big, nice dark possum, and that's the type of possum that people want. That's not a huge skin. Got a 3/4 size Matawai possum, and if these possums around here where I live, a very large one would be about that big. And that's been like I've trapped around here for 50 years. I've trapped up in the Ura for 50 years. Those possums have stayed exactly the same. They haven't intermingled. They haven't changed colour.
So they're not moving around much, and they're not interbreeding between areas.
That's what I see, yeah.
But is this accepted as a part of the science of possums? Do people know about this?
No, they don't. So I go there, and the skins are not that good. And but his son-in-law on the farm used to be a possum trapper, and he said, no, the skins in Otago on the western side of the lake are really good, and the ones on the eastern side, they're smaller, and it's always been like that. So where you go, there's a different skin. I go down the Turakina River, I did forests along there, around Hunterville. They're a horrible little wee ginger possum.
Okay.
And yet not far away in the Ruahine is a bigger 50% dark possum, but a lot bigger. And in straight lines, they're not far apart, but the possums are totally different breeds and different colours, different sizes. And I believe that, if there was DNA taken from different areas of possums throughout New Zealand, you would find that they are a different possum. And I see it more and more when I'm trapping now. A possum, when numbers get down, they'll breed twice a year because they stay in good condition. They can rear a joey and they wean it in October, November, and because they're in good body condition, they mate straight away. So they have another baby and they wean it again in March, April, and mate again. Yeah, to me, it doesn't add up that the possum is moving down and bringing TB into areas. I believe farmers bring TB into areas, and deer. Deer are big movers. The deer have spread far faster than possums, and I've processed over 100,000 possums for pet food, and
Right.
and I've never seen TB. Well, I tell a lie. I have seen TB in some from Hunterville, but from this area, all the Matawai East Coast area, I've never seen TB in a possum, and that's where you're gutting every one of them. You're looking at the offal,
Yeah.
and no, basically they're a pretty healthy animal. But I believe if there's TB in the area where they're living, they will pick it up. The thing is that you have to keep experimenting and changing to, as animals become aware of what you're doing, you've got to change your methods. And like I say, what I do now is not what I was doing 5 or 6 years ago in the way I trap. One of the biggest things with trapping possums is being able to read sign.
Yeah.
And in a lot of places, like down in southwestland and that, where it's very wet, the ground's rocky, you don't see runs on the ground or whatever. And the trees are mossy, and you've got to. It's quite an art to find sign where the possums are running, but they'll run along every log and up through here and down there without going on the ground long. So you've got to pick those places to be able to set traps. to catch. You know, sometimes I might have a trap here, I think, oh, that's, yep. And then I go along another 20 metres and I think, oh, maybe I'll put a trap here, but I'm not that happy with it. Well, this trap here might catch 10 possums and that trap there might catch none. And a possum from here could see that trap. It could see your lure, but it doesn't go there because this is where they travel. And I used to block off runs so that a possum had to go through over your trap, block it off with branches and bits of log and all that. So once upon a time you stuck a trap on a run or at the bottom of a big tree and the possum came along, but I found that if you blocked that off and made them go there, you would catch a lot more possums without moving a trap. But nowadays you're not allowed to put a trap on the camera, and I actually saw the possums, as you catch 3 or 4 and you're left with the more cunning ones, were climbing up and standing on the corners, missing the trap, eating a little hop down again.
Okay, so you put a camera in to watch the possums.
I did.
Getting trapped, and then
I watched these possums standing on the corners. I watched them climb up the tree and come around down, hang there and ate the lure and hopped off again without going near the trap. They get very cunning. But I made about 5 modifications to those high sets within a few months, which I reckon gave me another 30%. And my little giggle is that Doc have been using those same high sets right throughout New Zealand now for over 20 years. They've never modified them once because biting in them and a cutout and the trap fits in there. The trap is stapled to the runner, has a nail through it that I nail onto a tree, which is a natural lead for a possum to come up onto, and he actually has to go over the trap because he's going up there. And they're very, very efficient with these smaller traps, and yeah, I get really good results using these runners.
you think you'd yeah.
When I came to this area to trap in Ratahi, it was all native that had been logged, and they were cutting it down to plant a pine forest. So I was madly working in front of the bushmen cutting the native down to plant trees. And I had been working in the pines and forest products, which was pretty well trapped and poisoned. So I was digging up the ground with an axe, throwing some pre-feed there and doing that, and then coming back 4 or 5 days later when the possum had eaten the pre-feed and bury a trap there because they were so aware of traps. So with a buried trap, there was a huge amount of kiwis in the area, and they came for the dug up dirt.
Right.
And I caught quite a few kiwis in the first week I was here, but they were all caught by the toe. I took 4 of them out to release them to the Internal Affairs Ranger that was going to come in and remove the kiwis before they burnt the bush. But yeah, taking your traps off the ground stops that. It stops that ground bird. And Matawai, where I trap over there, it has the wickers have taken off. Like there's hundreds, there's literally thousands of wickers. And with a trap on the ground, you'd catch more wickers than you'd catch possums. Wow. So, well, generally in the 70s, there was millions of possums taken out in New Zealand with cyanide. There was cyanide powder to start with. Then they came in with a paste, which was cyanide mixed with a petroleum gel with a lure in it. And a lot of people put out big baits that would kill a lot of possums, and the baits were too big and they get water on them and they become sublethal. So they educated a lot of possums. I found that if you pre-fed and used a tiny little bait, a match head of cyanide, that would kill 2 or 3 possums, but have your baits fairly close together. They were easy to rub out into the dirt and become non-toxic. And I found if you pre-fed and poisoned for one night and then rubbed out your baits before the cyanide became sublethal just with dews or moisture on it, you didn't make possums poison shy.
Oh, yeah.
Years we've had, well, the main poison is 1080 going into New Zealand aerial. It's been going for 40 years. And it has had some pretty good effects in a lot of places, but it only takes 6 years again and your numbers are back to where they were basically. They do a 1080 drop and then they monitor before with traps on the ground, set on GPS readings, and it's a basic thing that they use right throughout New Zealand to keep it the same. And to me it's stupid because for a start, nobody's looking for sign and putting a trap where the possums are actually moving, and big poison drops. Possums become, the ones that are left, become very, very wary. They will not go at anything unusual. Even in areas where a lot of guys are using cyanide and using big baits and not rubbing it out, the possums become so aware they will not go near a flower lure or anything. They will not. Oil like a sweet almond oil, mixing raspberry oil or whatever with it and spraying it on the tree, and they could smell it but they couldn't see it. So they would come and think, what is that? And you could catch possums. But if you put a visible lure there, they wouldn't go near it. And that is traps off and leave them there with a runner for 20 days and come back at mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Catching possums, because the possums have been inquisitive. They've run up and down them, worked out they're not going to get caught. So they're using, if you put them in the right places, they're using them. That's on their run up there, and they come back with them forwards, and then you set those traps and you catch possums and you think, wow, we did, and so with the monitoring, the way they do it, what they're monitoring really is how shy possums are. And the big thing of poisoning in New Zealand now is bait stations, that they're everywhere. And people leave them there for years on end.
Yeah.
And they're facing to the way the weather's coming. When water blows in there and gets on these pellets, on the pellets in them, they get sublethal. The possum picks them up, and if he gets a sublethal dose of poison, he will never ever touch poison again. And they pass it on. They're really clever. Even before you skin the possums, the wild pigs used to follow you around and eat these possums. And they'd skin them and eat them. And they were a real pain. But after one 1080 drop, the pigs that come along to eat these possums get secondary poisoning, and most of the pigs up to 120 pound die. But the bigger pigs will often get sick, but there's not enough poison to kill them. And after that, it does not matter. For 10 years, a pig will not eat a possum in that area.
Okay.
They will not eat them. Even if you try and feed them possums, they will not eat them.
Mm.
And they pass it on to their young.
So
even and possums are the same. If you get sublethal doses, they pass it on. They will not put their head in a bait station again. And that is the trouble. People just top these bait stations up. There's already mouldy shit in the bottom. And if they use really properly, put so that the rain's not going to go in them, put them on really good places, look for sign where there's a tree they're running up, instead of just putting them every 100 or 200 metres on a GPS coordinates so they can find them. And I do all my trapping now is basically where there's contractors using bait stations, and I can still catch 1,000 possums a month behind these guys. I can catch more in a lot of places. So bait stations, they tend to drop the numbers, so you're not catching 20 possums out of a trap, but I can still catch 7 or 8 out of. A lot of the time they put a batten in, they hammer a fence batten in, and they nail a bait station on it, and I come along and I put my runner on that same batten, and I can catch 7 possums sometimes without moving it, and yet the possums aren't touching the bait in there because they're over it. But the other thing that really makes me, there are hundreds, thousands of bait stations left in New Zealand, all through the bush, everywhere, up the sides of creeks. They forget about that light and they come and put another light, and that light gets brittle and they fall off and they end up in creeks, and there's that much plastic being ground down in our waterways from bait stations that are.
You've been trapping for 50 odd years. Aren't you worried that you're going to run out of possums and kill them all?
No, look, when they first started using 1080 in the 80s, big time, you know, it's been around for a lot longer. But when they first started doing these areas, they'd never been aerial 1080 before, and they got some massive hits. They knocked possums way back, right? And then they come in and they thought, we'll put bait stations in for follow-up to take the ones that are left. You know, you have to be able to look and read sign and think, oh, there's a possum running here, there's animals moving here, and there's nothing here. So you have to put your bait station where they are, because they're not going to come off that run over to there to eat that on the bait station, generally. Sometimes, yeah, it's just lack of expertise or lack of knowledge about cleaning out those bait stations and moving them when they've been on a tree there and the grass is growing that high around the tree. A possum's not going to run up it, and over here there's a tree that you can see the possums are using. Move the bait station there, clean it out and put fresh bait in. Make sure there's no sloppy sludge in the bottom. But that takes a lot of extra time and work, because these guys are getting paid to fill up per bait station. So they run around like idiots throwing as much poison in a day, so they make $1,000 a day filling up bait stations. They don't give a shit about the results.
Are they ever going to be able to get rid of the possums?
I don't believe they are. I don't believe. Look, they have on some of the islands, and they reckon there's a few places in South Westland that they've made predator free, but I would debate that myself, because if you've got a bait station and nothing's eating it, and you've got a kill trap and nothing's going in it, they think there's nothing there. But I believe most of the time there are.
Do you think Doc has got an accurate idea of what the possum numbers are?
I don't think Doc do have an accurate idea. Look, where they come through and they aerial every 3 years in these high conservation zones, they keep the possum numbers pretty low. But I hunt a lot in those areas. I poke around them just out of interest, and where they think that they've got really low numbers from their monitors, I can see that those monitors are wrong. I can see sign. When the weather's fine, I go every day, and I run, and I do big days. You know, up until recently, I always left left in the dark and came home in the dark. And you're not making a fortune, people. It's just an obsession with me. It's something I love doing and being in the bush, and I'm a tally man. And people, the young guys I've tried to train up, they just think, bugger this, there's more to life than bloody running around possum traps every weekend, and you want a life. Yeah, fur buyers, skin buyers, the skin buyers mainly, and the fur buyers will tell you now, the main ones, they will tell you that they buy 90% of the product of 10% of the trappers in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So that makes 90% of the private trappers in New Zealand catch 10% of the product. So, and I know and I believe this, that 90% of the trappers in New Zealand they educate more animals than they catch. And every time you educate one, he's harder to catch. Most people buy, so you catch these possums in these little Chinese traps. The springs are nowhere near as good. They start off not bad, but they're still weakened. So the old possum works out, if he gets back here and he jerks, he can get it down to here. And if he gets down here, he jerks, he get it down to here. And he just jerks until he's gone. These Chinese traps should not be allowed to be brought into New Zealand because they're rubbish. Okay. And every time a possum jerks out of a trap, he's highly likely not to go and stick his foot in another one.
Yeah.
And if bait stations were used properly, they would be a lot better, but it's a lot of work to use them properly. And possums actually eat and they actually shit, so you can see shit if you look hard enough. Forest, and the tops out of just about every tree were chewed out.
Yeah.
Right? Huge damage. And the forestry boss said to me, he's ex-Forest Service, he's been there, said to me, oh, you know, Kerry always had a lot of possum damage because they had the contorta, green contorta in there, and the possums love green contorta. I trapped it. It was amazingly, there was a lot of cunning possums in there because they'd had a lot of guys in there doing what they shouldn't have been doing with these cheap traps on a long chain, and it took me quite a while, and there was a lot of really shy possums that wouldn't go near things. That's when I started using oil on the tree and no visible lures. But I'm looking at this damage and thinking, oh, this is unbelievable. But it took me 4 years of going round and round that forest, and it became uneconomic for me to trap, but it cleaned their damage up. They basically had no trees being chewed. So yeah, with consistent trapping year after year after year, I got those numbers down pretty low and stuff. So I have to be catching so many possums an hour to make a living. Once I get under that, I'm all I'm doing is wearing out my gear, and not making enough money. But it's not actually trapping generally down to nothing because I'm not getting paid. I can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
I'm trapping down to pretty low, but I'm not trying to trap down to nothing because I've got to get. And the docs and that say, oh yeah, well that's why they farm possums, but you're not farming possums. You're just trying to be as economic. You're trying to catch as many as you can, but you've still got to make a living, and you've still got to be able.
If you caught 80% or 90%, how economic is it going to be to get the last 10%?
Oh, it's not for me, you know.
Yeah, not for you. Well, in fact, is it even possible to?
Oh, you could if you were paid.
Do you think you could really wipe out?
No, I don't think you'll ever wipe out possums.
Even when they get hammered, it's the local ones that come back and reproduce.
It is the local ones that come back.
So
and
are they getting invaded? Are they getting invaded by other ones? No.
Well, that's what everybody says. That, you know, they get a 98% kill, and then these possums move into these voids that they leave.
Yes.
And I believed that for a long time, but I don't believe that. I haven't believed that for 20 years now.